I made this off-meta deck. Play so dirty. I'll show you what makes Dogmatika one of my all-time favorite decks, from exploring their game plan, their new support, and their key concepts, with some tips along the way. And it all starts with their game plan. Dogmatika's game plan is where their lore comes to life. The Dogmatika are a deeply religious nation that follows the mark of the stigmata, so pretty much anything that doesn't bear the mark is heresy to them. And in game that translates directly into how the deck operates. To the Dogmatika, all monsters from the extra deck are treated as heretics, so much that a good chunk of Dogmatika's cards actually lock us out from extra deck summoning. Now you might think, this sounds pretty bad, right? I mean, floodgating ourselves from summoning the best monsters in the game doesn't sound very good, but the way that Dogmatika plays around the restriction is actually quite clever. Rather than summoning monsters from the extra deck, Dogmatika likes to rip monsters out instead, and doing so actually can be quite powerful. Does your opponent like to end on key boss monsters? Just rip them out. Do they have powerful one-ups that you don't want to deal with? Rip those out too. And because we can also rip from our own extra deck, we gain access to a toolbox of floating effects. Now, though this is a pretty neat gimmick, you might wonder, is it really worth the extra deck lock though? Heck no. In fact, it's actually why I think that playing pure Dogmatika has never been competitively viable. But then, how can Dogmatika play dirty? Well, this is actually where a cool shift in Dogmatika's lore comes in. Dogmatika's main protagonist, Ecclesia the Virtuous, is the one that stood up against Dogmatika's wave to stigmata. TLDR, she protected an outcast, got kicked out of the religion, and expanded her horizons, making new allies along the way. And because of her open-mindedness, Ecclesia and her new allies make Dogmatika a significantly stronger deck today. And with the power of friendship, no, I'm just kidding. With the power of some recent support, plus a few notable mentions, Dogmatika's restrictions no longer become that big of an issue. So it's probably a good time that we get into Dogmatika's new support. This is where everything changes for Dogmatika. Not too long ago, the highly anticipated branded support finally arrived in Master Duel, and it's a big deal. Now before some of you start thinking, hey, that's not Dogmatika support, in reality it pretty much is. The new support actually breathes new life into both branded and Dogmatika, so they don't just die to some random yokai girl. And although the two decks now share a solid chunk of the same cards, their playstyles get to stay uniquely intact, which I find pretty cool. Like bringing out the 3 champions of Sword Soul to bridge into our Dogmatika line, or ripping out our Ecclesia and the Dark Dragon to give us another way to board break, goes quite at home with Dogmatika. Plus, all these cool interactions happen before Dogmatika's extra deck lock kicks in, so it's a huge win for them. But that's not all. Aside from the branded support, we actually did get some direct support for Dogmatika as well, and this awesome support finally helps solve the issues that have plagued Dogmatika for the longest time. But it's main phase 3 now. The Fallen and the Virtuous is probably the most custom card Dogmatika has ever had. Not only can it let us pop any face-up card, but it also can revive a monster from either graveyard at quick effect speed. Plus, it's always treated as both a Dogmatika and a branded card, making it highly searchable. This card alone solves Dogmatika's lack of graveyard recovery. Plus, they can finally do more against decks that don't really care about their extra deck. It's just that good. But in addition to the Fallen and the Virtuous, we still got a whole lot more. If you're a huge Dogmatika fan like me, you probably know that Dogmatika likes to ritual summon. And I'm happy to say that we got a really nice piece of support to help us do that. With Dogmatika Fleur-de-Lis to Thunderbolt, we have a super cool way to quickly set and activate Dogmatika trap cards. And my go-to one has to be Dogmatika Turgy. This neat little trap lets us ritual summon directly from our deck. And more ways to ritual summon means more ways to bring Dogmatika's boss monsters out. It's actually quite critical if you intend to play Dogmatika as an extra deck ripping machine. It's how I like to play them at least. But after a whole lot of playtesting with the super awesome support, there's a few things that are really important when piloting and building Dogmatika. So this is probably a good time to go into Dogmatika's key concepts. These are the things that I take with me when climbing the ladder. As powerful as it is to deny extra deck monsters from our opponent, a lot can still go wrong. Dogmatika has many ways to rip cards out of the extra deck, but we just have to be careful on which ones we use. The ones that give us the choice on which cards to rip, those are all good. But the ones that give our opponent the choice, now that's where things fall apart. And I know, it's super cool when we get to be that villain that makes our opponent rip all their extra deck cards out. But in ranked, we get outright murdered almost every time, especially higher in the ladder. Believe me when I say that I've learned my lesson. And with all the branded decks going around, you probably can see why we don't want to let them choose which cards to send. So that's why I sadly ended up dropping Dogmatika, Albazoa, and Maximus. But don't worry, we still have plenty of ways to still rip the extra deck. And the important thing is this: ripping fewer key cards from our opponent is a whole lot more useful than ripping a bunch of useless ones. As long as you remember this about Dogmatika, you'll be golden. But since we're on the topic of extra deck rips, how about our extra deck? Good thing for us, we have a ton of options to choose from. Our extra deck is our own little toolbox. And from my playtesting, there are definitely a few that have been super impactful when climbing. Now, though our opponent is grinding the game out, we can still hold them back, especially with the key cards we ripped out. For board breaking, Entis, Malong, and Ecclesia cover different forms of removal. And for card advantage, Albion, Titaniclad, and Dogma give plenty of ways to gain resources. Generally, Dogmatika has a good amount of flexibility when it comes to what tools they want to put in their extra deck, and as long as your extra deck has plenty of graveyard effects, you should be good. But to wrap things up, there's just one more important reminder that I'd like to tell myself when playing Dogmatika. And that's just to remember that Dogmatika's cards generally lock us out of the extra deck only after they're played. Oh, and White Knight of Dogmatika just straight up locks us the moment that she's out. And yeah, that's how I like to play Dogmatika. I know this isn't absolutely everything about them, especially now that they can be combined with branded, but hopefully you can see now why Dogmatika gets to finally play dirty. And here's my deck list. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing or giving this video a like or even a hype. Your support means a whole lot to small content creators like myself. Plus, I love replying to all your comments. It warms my heart knowing that the stuff I create makes your day a little better. I hope it does. But if you're looking for another cool deck, maybe you'll want to check out my other video where I showcase one of the most forgotten archetypes. It's super awesome. Anyway, thanks for stopping by. Bye bye!